Hello and welcome to The Mirror. My name is Rick Novy and this is episode number 8. My special guests today are Dani and Eytan Kollin, who co-wrote their first novel called The Unincorporated Man. This is the fourth of 4 interviews that I collected at WesterCon 2009 in Tempe, Arizona. Hope you enjoy it.
Trust me, story of my life. Life, yeah.
We're here at WesterCon 2009. I'm with Dani and Eytan Kollin, and they are newly published authors of a science fiction novel called The Unincorporated Man. And they, if I'm not mistaken, drove out from LA to attend WesterCon. And
that is correct. Yes.
And tell us a little bit about yourselves and how this book project came to be.
I think I can hold this mini microphone all by myself, thank you. This book project came to be because both Eytan and myself were poor and destitute. Actually, Eytan was unemployed living at my parents' house. I was unemployed living at my in-laws' house, and I always knew that Eytan had a bunch of great ideas, and I had always encouraged him to write. And he always said, yeah, whatever. And now I had an opportunity to sort of, do something with him. And I said, well, why don't we pick one of your ideas? And then we'll write it together and see how that works. And he said, sure, why not? And he gave me a bunch of ideas that he had thought of or worked on or put down in paper. And this one just jumped out at me. And I said, dude, this is the one we're doing. And he agreed.
What he said.
Okay, and I understand you spent some time in Israel for a while before you came back to the U.S. and worked on the novel?
Actually, I had no idea that I would ever be working on a novel while I was in Israel. I was working at a software company and had started a software company of my own, actually, that I was fortunate enough to get bought out of, not enough to, buy a nice house, but enough to pay off the bills. And then when I came back to the States and couldn't find a job, that was at the point I said, hey, let's do something different. And the novel idea came about.
And when you're working on a collaboration, how does the work tend to go? Do you work together? Do you write together? Or does one throw out the ideas and the other write them up?
Well, initially what happened was we said, you write one chapter, I'll write another. But because this is Eytan's universe and it's in his head, what he ended up doing was sending me a draft. And then my responsibility was not only to write chapter 2, but also edit his draft, because my job as an advertising copywriter is to essentially edit stuff out and make it flow a little bit easier. So what ended up happening was that I was taking so long to sort of recraft or re-edit the stuff that he was giving me in a way that I felt a reader would want to read, because Eytan is much more interested in telling the story than necessarily crafting the words, that he was just boundary ahead of me. And that ended up being the process by which we found we worked best together, which is to say that Eytan will just sort of throw something out and say, okay, I'm moving on, and I'll be left to look at it and say, what do I want to do with this? Do I want to take out half of it? Do I want to add pages to it? Is it only needing a little bit of editing? But for the most part, that's how we sort of did it together, so that I'll essentially write I'll have first pass at the edit, and then Eytan will read it over and make sure the universe is sound, and at that point we will submit it to the publisher.
Okay, let me ask this of Eytan. The idea that you had for Unincorporated Man, how old was that idea? How long have you had it before it actually was thrown out to become something that you actually brought to reality?
We started the book in April 2001. I had it for at least a decade before that. I would just take these ideas, find them, file them away, and then forget about them, and then come up with another idea, write it down, file it away, and forget about it. I've still got a dozen of them.
So did the ideas come up originally intending to write them as a story, or were they just ideas that you had that you thought were cool ideas and you didn't know what you were going to do with them?
I thought that I wrote them up as stories. I always wrote them down to the concept that this would make a good book. And we've got plans to actually work on some of the other ones after we get this one completely finished.
Okay, and have you started that yet, or you're just still kind of getting over the...
Okay, so, I'm sorry. So the Unincorporated Man is part of a series of books that Tor bought from us. After we're done with the series of books in this universe, we are certainly starting on some more of his other ideas that we pulled out.
David Hartwell, I believe, is your editor at Tor, and he was interested in your book because he found it a little bit different and challenging in some ways that maybe isn't the way you might think about being challenging. So can you talk about that?
Well, a lot of science fiction is simply, here's this concept, here's this story, these people have to struggle with this and solve this problem, and they happen to be in this environment. Or they could be in that environment, or they could be in another environment. What was ours is the environment really asks a fundamental question, which is ultimately, what price freedom? What is the freedom that you actually want, and what are you willing to do for it? Even if the whole world says you're wrong, and you know you're right, are you willing to stand up and say, hey, wait a minute? And so it does ask a very fundamental question, which we tend to ignore a lot of times. What if somebody offers you perfect security, and you just got to kiss your liberty goodbye? Before you say, well, of course people would choose liberty, remember, every time a presidential candidate has gone up, they've always promised more security. Whether it's economic or military or against terrorism or against the big corporation, whatever it is, they've always promised more security, and every time we've voted for them. When's the last time we voted for the guy that said, no, you're on your own, but I'll give you more liberty?
And I think ultimately why David liked the book was because couched in a story, it asked the reader to question what they had allowed themselves, even today. What have you given up and what have you gotten for it? And essentially that's what the Unincorporated Man is about. A world in which people buy and sell shares of themselves like we buy and sell shares of companies today, and where most people don't own a majority of themselves. Our protagonist essentially is the one unincorporated man, and he says, I know you've got everything worked out here, but look what you've given up. And what have you gotten for it? And essentially he's asking the questions that Eytan and I often ask when we look at, what today we're prepared to give up and what we actually get for it.
So the basic premise of the book is that individuals are owned sort of the way companies are with shares of stock.
It's a little bit more complex than that. I'll let Eytan go into his thing.
Basic premise is that the problem capitalism has, and capitalism's one true fault, is that it's amoral. It's not that it's immoral. Capitalism's not evil. Capitalism doesn't wake up in the morning and say, I will kill babies. Capitalism simply wants to make a profit. And if it has to kill a dozen babies to make a profit, capitalism will find the most efficient way to do so, because that's how it functions. It's amoral. It doesn't care about people. It only cares about profit. What the incorporated system comes up with is the solution to that. And it's very simple. You incorporate the individual. So all of a sudden everybody gets to own a share of the individual, and all of a sudden capitalism gives a huge crap about the individual, and it wants to make sure that individual is doing well. Not because capitalism is kind and wonderful and nice, not because capitalism has the best of intentions, but simply because a healthy person, an educated person, a person with a home and a job is very profitable. And it will work its wonders of magic, its efficiency, its information, its innovation skills, to create a society where everybody has a job, everybody has an education, everybody has health care and a home, not because it's the right thing to do, but because it is the profitable thing to do. The difficulty with that is that if everybody owns a piece of everybody else, everybody has a direct means of controlling everybody else. And it's a very easy way of doing so. Once you lose majority control of yourself, where you are educated, where you live, where you work, might not necessarily be up to you. You might lose that stock vote. And all of a sudden, you want to live in Idaho? Nope, you're in London. You want to help colonize Mars? Nope, sorry, we're going to need you on the moon. And again, capitalism is not stupid. It won't make you do things that you absolutely hate, because then you'll be rebellious and not very profitable. But it will find ways of making you accept the decisions that are made for you, because there's profit in it. And again, it's a very good example that I heard is that this doesn't happen all at once. It's not like you wake up one day and you're in capitalistic slavery. This is like the frog that's in the kettle of water. How do you get a frog into boiling water? You put it in cold water, and then you light the fire. And this is what happens to the society. The water gets more and more freedom start disappearing, and they don't even realize it. Because look at everything they have. There is no hunger. It's not probable. There is no homelessness. It's not probable. Illiteracy? Are you kidding me? They'll get you that education because it's in everyone's interest. But they lose more and more things. And it's not until our unincorporated man wakes up and says, what the hell have you guys done, that people start to really question it and start to ask that question themselves. And that's a supremely dangerous thing for a society to start to do. To question its own belief system at that late a date can cause massive difficulties. To sum up, imagine all the fire, passion, destruction of the French, the Russian, the American Revolution made manifest in one human being. One human being's unwillingness to accept the system that he finds. That's essentially what the book is about.
And I guess to find out why this individual is unincorporated, you need to buy the book.
No.
No, we'll tell you.
Not really. I mean, it's not like a giveaway. In other words, he's found, and it's right at the beginning, and it's even in the sleeve, so it's not a spoiler. He's found in a suspension chamber, quite accidentally, while somebody's on a mining excavation. He's excavation, and he has been suspended long enough that society has passed him by, and everybody in the system, which extends to the Oort cloud, has become incorporated. But because he was from the pre-incorporation time, he has not been incorporated, hence the name of the book, The Unincorporated Man.
Okay, that's a very interesting premise, and it sounds like a very interesting book. It's available from Tor at bookstores everywhere.
Bookstores everywhere, Amazon, Borders, on Kindle, audiobooks, and available also in audio CD. So audiobooks.com as well as audio CD.
Okay. As new authors, tell us a little bit about what the experience was like going through the first novel process after you finished the manuscript.
Well, first of all, this is just a plug, but one of the first things that I was told, or we were told, but Eytan sort of foisted it on me, and I don't mind doing it, was by David. He said, "Do you have to have a blog?" This was 2 years ago, and I said, "Well, what am I going to blog about?" He says, "It doesn't matter. Everybody has a blog now. You're an author. Get a blog." And my feeling was, nobody knows me, and if I start talking about something every day, big deal. So I racked my brains, and I finally. I talked to a bunch of people, and I finally came up with, well, I'm a first-time author, and I will take people who would like to be authors through the experience of what it's like to actually sign a deal, and then what is expected of you, what did you expect, and how much of that got, thrown by the wayside. And so that's the long way of saying, go to my LiveJournal site, dcollin.livejournal.com, and you'll get the sort of the past year or so's experience of the rose glasses coming way off. The experience. So again, the question is, what was repeat it?
Well, a little bit as first-time authors going through. Obviously you alluded to that the experience was quite a bit different from what you expected. From the time you finished the manuscript until the time the book appeared on the shelves, how much time was that?
Oh boy.
Well, it depends on which manuscript. We actually got the first manuscript done in about 2.5 years. That is not the manuscript that we presented. We then rewrote that one. We then rewrote that one. We then rewrote that one again. Then in 2005, we submitted it to a professional editor. We actually paid him, and he ripped it to shreds and gave us 10 major points we had to redo, of which we agreed to do 9 of them, to recreate and craft it yet again. At which point we then started, we got an agent. That's another story, which you'll very humorously read about in Donnie's blog. The debate is the worst agent better than no agent? And we really don't know. we really don't know. But at that point, then it was submitted to a bunch of people, and then Tor was interested. The total, from the time we started writing the book to the time we held the published book in our hand, was almost exactly 8 years. April 2001 to March 31st, 2009.
Right. We signed the contract 2.5 years ago?
Yes.
Yeah. So the time from the time doing the manuscript till signing the contract was about 6 years?
Yeah.
Yeah. And about a little over 2 years till we actually saw it in hardcover.
One thing you mentioned that strikes me as a bit unusual is that you hired a professional editor. Could you talk to that a little bit? I know that's not necessarily something that's always recommended.
Right. Well, we did. Truthfully, we probably did. We did everything wrong in terms of getting this book published. We didn't have an agent per se when we signed the deal. We found a lawyer who was able to help us, go through it. we didn't even submit it correctly to Tor. We did it in the wrong font, in the wrong, everything. And apparently there's very strict ways you have to do things. And I think probably the reason that we didn't do any of this stuff is because it was done on a lark, and we just said, let's just start writing and see what happens.
What could possibly go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong? So with regards to the professional editor, we didn't know we weren't supposed to hire a professional editor, and that there was a whole grouping of, of blogs out there and people out there saying, don't waste your money on people who will take it to tell you how to write your book. You should know in your heart how to write your book. Quite frankly, it's BS. If you can find a good editor, who will tell you quite honestly where your weak spots are and where your strengths are, they can help you immeasurably. And in our case, I don't mind plugging the guy. His name is Michael Levin, and his website was Writer #2 Author. We don't get any money or anything from it, but he really, he said, let me start out by telling you what I really love about this, and I think that you will be able to sell this. Let me tell you what's missing. And he, like Eytan said, he gave us a 10-page, document. This is what needs to be fixed. This is what needs to be fixed. Chief of which was, we approached it as like two guys, having a nice intellectual argument. And he said, you're missing your Star Wars stuff in here. You're missing a little more action. You're missing a bad guy being really bad. You're missing unrequited love. Basic premises of a story that we were like, oh, that stuff has to be in here. Yeah. So, again, I'm not saying rush out to hire a professional editor. I am saying find somebody who's reputable, that you could get a recommendation from somebody that you trust, and most likely that person will well be worth your time.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. This has been Dani and Eytan Kollin, and their new book is The Unincorporated Man. And if you'd like to speak to it one last time.
Absolutely. A nice, dignified sort of ability, just a simple request to get you to basically purchase this book. And now I shall beat up my brother until 10 books are sold.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Dani and Eytan Kollin. We did not have anybody working sound, so I apologize for any instances of static or any other background noises that you've heard. It's going to be a very short news segment today. There was only one item that I found interesting, and that is that Analog Magazine is about to celebrate its 80th anniversary. Analog Magazine has a long and storied history, and I do have an interview with the editor of Analog Magazine, Dr. Stanley Schmidt, that was aired in episode number 5 of The Mirror. You can see that on Blip TV. It's in the Novy MIRror archives. It's episode number 5. That's all we have today. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.